we switched to the other side of the Atlantic, and now Milenka Lopez Arellano in International Relations with a thesis on Theater of the 68, Mexican Theater as Protest and Memory Preservation.
Good evening, everyone. I'm here to talk to you about the potential political role of theater. And to do this, I looked at a very specific case study, which was the Local Massacre in Mexico, which occurred in 1968. And what that was a student movement that started that summer. It started out as a simple dispute, which, when the police intervened, snowballed into a city-wide student protest against government repression, freedom of expression, and educational autonomy, basically. But this probably would have ended in similar ways as other student movements that happened the exact same year. However, in Mexico, at the same time, they were preparing to host the 1968 Olympics, the first Latin American country to do so. So this was very prestigious, and this was kind of accumulation of the Mexican miracle of showing a modernizing Mexico. However, how can you show on an international stage that your country is developing and undergoing a miracle if your generation of intellectuals and young people are rioting on the streets? So in order to solve that, the government decided to completely massacre a group of around 300 students who were gathering peacefully in the Tlatelolco neighborhood of Mexico. Conveniently enough, the next day the square was completely wiped, and the government decided not to talk about it for about 30 years. So what do you do when you have a movement that is repressed from the beginning and then ultimately silenced and continuously silenced for about 3 decades? So obviously, as was shown by the student movement, civil disobedience was no longer a viable source because it was shut down. And so my argument here is that in order to provide a voice for these students, different sorts of arts had to become the new narrative. And this manifested most prominently in documentaries and poetry, and less known in theatrical plays. So what I decided to do is analyze about 14 scripts that were not published until 1999 by a Mexican director, actor, and producer, Felipe Galvan, probably because they were censored and hidden, and a lot of them were not published till recently. And so I studied these plays and found throughout them 2 common themes. One was the importance of memory preservation, and the other one was the symbolism of protest through text. And so to analyze these frameworks, I looked into Hannah Arendt's theories of civil disobedience, applied it to the student movement, but then also applied it to how writing and performing, if possible, theatrical scripts can be a way of protesting. And for memory preservation, I looked into Pierre Nora's theory of lieu de mémoire, which is this idea that certain places encompass memory as well as forgetting, and you choose which one in a communal sense. So I structured it by looking at plays first that were published before the year 2000, and then one play that I found that was published in 2008. And the divide is very important because it was not until the election of 2000 that Mexico elected a different party than the PRI, which is the Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which was basically the ruling party since the Mexican Revolution of 1910 all the way up until 2000, which, as you can imagine, when you have one party rule for so long, opposition is very easily oppressed. However, I argue that the Tlatelolco Massacre was just one in a series of events that eventually led to the delegitimation of the pre-government. And in 2000, this new party, the PAN, was elected in, and because of that, there was a shift in how you can talk about events that were censored, like the Tlatelolco Massacre. So a common theme that I found in the plays written before was that they didn't mention Tlatelolco or 1968 too explicitly. The first 2 plays that were published in 69, so almost immediately after the event, were very symbolic, metaphorical, and allegorical in a way. So there was no proof that these plays were tied to this event. You would just kind of have to look for it to know. The first play that mentioned just the year 68 was published in 1970. It was censored and had to be premiered in New York. And then the rest of the plays gradually started mentioning it a little bit more openly since the Mexican government kind of democratized a little bit, starting in the 80s, accumulating in 2000. So I looked at one play specifically, which was Commemorantes, by Emilio Carbadillo, and this play was really short, 8 pages, and it basically just showed the yearly ritual where mourners will come to the square of Tlatelolco, light candles, and remember the students that were killed. And this is important because not only does the play itself kind of symbolically bring in rituals, like pre-Hispanic rituals, this is a ritual in itself, and the play is ritualizing this ritual by showing a mother coming to light a candle. And so for this show specifically, I think when this was written in 1988, I think, this was a way of, under this time you still couldn't talk about it that much, so just the fact that you have a show commemorating this event in a time when it wasn't really popular to do so can serve definitely for memory preservation, but is also kind of an act of civil disobedience within itself. So how does this work after 2000 if technically Mexico is more democratized? So I looked at a play written in 2008 called Olympia 68, which combined the events of the Olympics and the massacre in a very creative way by basically following the lives of an international group of athletes coming to Mexico, competing in the competition and trying to figure out what the political culture is. And this show obviously mentions Tlatelolco and 68 and everything that happened very openly because now they can. And it was performed for the 40th commemoration, so that itself is significant. Now it is an official thing that the government allows. And basically I said that even though you're not protesting by writing it, since it is allowed to talk about it now, it does draw a lot of connections to current political situations, just like the fact that in Mexico, holding anyone accountable for a crime is still a very slow process that has not been completely modernized. And so I think that my overall conclusion is that art, while it's not a driving force of politics, and it definitely probably will not commit change in itself, it does play an important role in just implementing these ideas, especially when they're not openly talked about. So for example, the massacre, just remembering that it happened before it was talked about, art can help do that in an unofficial way. And then, of course, more modern plays, by looking at the past, you can critique the future or the present without openly doing that as well. So that was basically what I looked at, and I found that theater is just a really fascinating way to read the political culture of a specific place during a specific time. Thank you very much.